As he approached the entrance, Mickey heard the sounds of motions inside. Quickly and very quietly, he ducked around the corner, squeezing against the speakeasy's far wall, and raised an ear to listen. He recognized the voices of Murray, the rat who led the biters, and Peter Dane. "Are you sure you can make it on your own?" "Sure, I'm sure. No problem." "Oh, and Mr. Murray, sir?" "Yeah, what do you want?" As Peter spoke, he lowered his voice to a whisper, forcing Mickey to creep around the edge of the wall to hear. "Might I ask you a rather personal question?" "Sure, I owes you one. Why are you whispering?" "I'm curious. What drove you to join up with this Doc Chuck fellow?" "'Cause he knocked off all the other bosses is why. Don't ask me how he did it, but I figure if he could do that, I don't want to be on his bad side, you know?" "So it was his strength, then?" "Yeah, you could say that." "And the others? I assume they joined him for the same reason, correct?" "Some, yeah. Some of them came over when Chubby Charlie got hit. Didn't like the way Eddie was doing things. Why, you planning something?" Mickey grinned as he heard Peter's answer. "I don't suppose there's any point in denying it. Yes, I am." "For Doc Chuck or Eddie G?" Mickey crept closer. Whatever came next, he was sure he wanted to hear it. "For Doc Chuck," Peter answered simply. There was a long silence. Finally, Murray spoke up again. "You're not going to try and stop me now, are you?" "No." "I ain't part of this plan of yours, am I?" "No, Murray." "Then why'd you save me? You did mean all that stuff you said about traitors and stuff, right?" "Possibly. I know it's a long shot. I just abhor violence." Murray chuckled. Sure you do." Mickey darted back around the corner as Murray staggered into the open. Once the rat had disappeared from sight, Mickey slipped back to the entrance. Peter was also gone, much to Mickey's delight. There would be no one to observe his return. But there might be someone keenly interested in what Mickey had heard. This was his chance to curry favor with Eddie G. Not that far away, on the other side of the block, in fact, Charles Vincetti's eyes snapped open at the sound of footsteps on the stairs. He growled in discomfort as he forced himself to sit up and watch them arrive. The first to appear was Matrix, scuttling along the walls and ceiling. The spider was soon followed by the lady, the infamous legend herself, Elizabeth Hartley. Chubby Charlie recognized her in an instant, from her face to the little red cloak wrapped around her shoulders. Although Elizabeth was a great deal slimmer than the last time Chubby Charlie had seen her, he did not immediately recognize Stu the Shrew, though Chubby Charlie recognized the little guy's voice the moment he spoke. The next two faces, Monster and Ben, were unknown to the street rat. He hadn't met Monster during Elizabeth's first visit to the neighborhood, and it wasn't until several months later that Ben joined up with the crew. Still, Chubby Charlie relaxed at the sight of so many friendly faces. Elizabeth, however, did not. The last time she saw Chubby Charlie, he had been pointing a shotgun at her. She cast another glance about the old workshop, nose twitching as she sniffed at the air.
"Peter isn't here."
Matrix confirmed. Monster grumbled as he shoved his way past, and peered about in the dark spaces, inhaling deeply as he nosed about the floor and walls.
"He was here. And someone else. A woman."
Ben scratched his head. "You can tell that by smelling?" Monster's brow furrowed as he glanced back to the ex-lab mouse.
"You can tell a great deal by smell."
He disappeared for a moment into the deeper darkness, and then reappeared, apparently satisfied.
"No one else. We should be safe." "'Scuse me, boy,"
Chubby Charlie spoke up.
"I ain't chopped liver, son."
Monster grimaced.
"No, I assume you're the man we came to help."
"Oh," Chubby Charlie grinned sheepishly.
"I was just thinking you didn't see me here." "I didn't have to," Monster growled. "I could smell you." Chubby Charlie blinked and then sniffed under his arms.
"Where's Pete?" Stu blurted out. "Ain't he supposed to be here?"
"Soon," Chubby Charlie explained. "He's casing the old gang."
"That sounds dangerous,"
Elizabeth remarked. She gave Monster a concerned look.
"He may need backup. One of us should—"
"No," Chubby Charlie cut her off.
Pete knows what he's doing. Got himself on Eddie G's good side.
Who?
Elizabeth raised an eyebrow and took a seat at the edge of the crate.
Muscle,
Chubby Charlie explained.
in the old days he was a nobody, a face in the crowd. Wasn't till he got that fancy heater that he started getting noticed.
Maybe you should start at the beginning.
Elizabeth remarked.
What fancy heater?
Chubby Charlie reached into a corner and pulled forth a short metal rod, his old shotgun.
This is a heater. Eddie got himself a fancy one. Throws a bunch of slugs at once.
Slugs? Stu repeated, licking his lips at the thought.
Ammo,
Chubby Charlie clarified.
as in bullets.
Stu's expression immediately fell.
And before that?
Elizabeth asked. Chubby Charlie sighed and lowered his weapon.
All the bosses were getting bumped off. The big cheese was the last one down. I was all that was left. God knows I tried to hold the organization together. Eddie tried to get one up on me a bunch of times, but too many of the boys stood by me. I guess I was the closest thing left to the big cheese. Then he got a hold of that.
Fancy heater.
Elizabeth finished the thought. Chubby Charlie nodded.
Then there was no stopping him. He just walked into Mr. Biggs and blew me away. "And Pete's on this guy's good side,"
Stu exclaimed. Elizabeth nodded in thought.
It's true then. The best thing we can do is to stay put and wait for his return.
The sound of monster growling set everyone's nerves on edge.
I don't like this. Sitting on my hands when I should be confronting the enemy. That enemy's got all my boys between him and you.
Chubby Charlie spoke up.
This ain't no time to run in, guns blazing.
A heavy silence fell over the gathered mice, and shrew, and rat, and spider, as there came the faint sound of scratching overhead. Then they heard the light slap of footsteps on the stairs, slowly descending towards them. There was a heavy collective sigh as Peter strode into view. "Excellent," Peter remarked, rubbing his hands together. "I'm glad to see you've all arrived."
You kept us waiting long enough,
Stu grumbled. Monsters swatted the shrew across the shoulders.
Ow! What? What have you found?
Monster asked. "The very beginnings of a plot," Peter mused. "The lads don't appear overly fond of Eddie G's leadership, and a number of them defected after Mr. Vinzetti's alleged death." Chubby Charlie's ears perked up at that.
Come again?
Peter rubbed his chin in thought. "It would appear, even in death, you have some sway."
Course I do, in this condition.
Chubby Charlie motioned to his stitches. Peter chuckled. "What I mean is, many of the rats, on both sides, still appear loyal to you. With just a little push, I believe we could undermine Eddie's rule." Chubby Charlie broke into a broad grin at the suggestion.
Well, what are we waiting for?
He strained to heave himself out of his nest, but Peter rushed to the big rat's side to hold him back. "You, sir, are in no condition to be doing anything," Peter cautioned. "The task at hand calls for someone quick and agile enough to appear and disappear quickly and without a trace."
I used to be pretty light on my feet, boy,
Chubby Charlie countered.
Don't let the fact fool you.
Yes, I remember. But right now you're still weak. Now, I intend to fabricate an imposter. A fake Chubby Charlie, if you will, to stand in for you until it's safe for you to make an appearance. The others exchanged quizzical glances.
Well,
Stu piped up,
I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I ain't tall enough to pass for the big fella.
Nor I, Monster agreed, and none of us has the physique. And I'm afraid I have other responsibilities just now, Peter admitted. However, I believe I can compensate for any of your shortcomings. He regarded each of them in turn. All I need is the right voice.
Voice?
Monster raised an eyebrow. Of course, I shall rig up a spotlight to obscure the impostor's features. Therefore, to pull off a convincing performance, he shall have to perform a convincing imitation of the real Chubby Charlie's voice. As Peter said it, he cast an eager look in Monster's direction.
Me?
Monster asked, shocked. Indeed, you are the largest among us, besides myself, of course, and therefore the ideal candidate.
But only if y'all can do a convincing Chubby Charlie voice, right?
Stu chimed in. Monster gazed uneasily around the room.
Well, what should I say?
Exactly that, Peter shrugged. But try to say it like Chubby Charlie. Monster rolled his eyes.
This is madness. Utter madness. Not bad, son, Chubby Charlie remarked, rubbing his chins. But try putting some gravel in it.
And be sure to speak from the diaphragm, Peter added, feeling himself just under the ribs. Monster heaved a sigh, a look of weary resignation flashing across his face.
Fine, then.
Pausing a moment to compose himself, he then spoke in his best Chubby Charlie voice.
How's this?
Peter blinked and scratched his cheek. Well, it's hardly awful. I might suggest dressing up your dialect a little. Punctuate your sentences with words like boy and son, and slur some of the sounds. Monster paused a moment and then spoke. Peter closed his eyes with a faint chuckle and forced a hollow grin. Well, that's a start, I suppose. Stu laughed.
Ha! If that's the start, I'd hate to see the finish.
There was a long silence, and Stu suddenly became aware of many eyes fixed on him.
What? Something I said?
Elizabeth grinned up at Peter, who nodded back to her.
What? What's going on?
Stu glanced between the two, and then he saw Monster's face tightening into a rather nasty smirk.
Don't look at me like that. Just wipe that look off your face.
Peter, I think we found our voice,
Elizabeth announced.
Who, me?
Stu exclaimed.
Little old me? But I'm too short.
Indeed, Peter mused, rubbing his chin. He crouched down in front of Stu and then glanced up at Monster. If only we could combine you two somehow. Then a light flickered on in his eyes. Matrix, lad! Come! The spider hopped down from the ceiling, landing squarely on Peter's shoulder. Uh-huh. Matrix, I shall need you to spin a very special web. A sort of, how to describe it? Peter paused a moment and thought. I require a sort of harness, fitted specially to Monster's measurements, similar to those that some female great apes carry their young in.
I don't like where this is going,
Monster growled.
Ditto,
Stu agreed. Matrix scuttled up Monster's back, drawing a surprised flinch and grunt from the huge mouse. The spider then produced a little tape measure, which he handled with 2 limbs, and a notebook and pencil, which a second pair of limbs used to record measurements. Peter grinned as his confidence swelled. Then he disappeared into the darkness, slipping through the ruined remnants of the old wall. From the inky void there came a sound of clanking and crashing as Peter rummaged through his old store of spare parts. Monster and Stu exchanged uneasy glances. Elizabeth's eyes sparkled with mischief as she leaned back and drew a knee up to her chest. She cracked into a trickle of giggles as she watched Monster and Stu's expression continue to deteriorate at the sound of Peter clattering about. Ben glanced absently between the three. Eventually he began to chuckle, and then laugh stupidly along with Elizabeth. Peter emerged from the shadows a moment later. In one arm he cradled what faintly resembled a tiny tuba, even small for a mouse. In the other he carried a tangled mass of wires and scrap metal. Stu grumbled.
What you got there, Pete?
Peter dumped his load of wires and metal on the floor, and turned to Stu, holding out the strange little tuba. I say, might you try this on for size?
I don't know how to tell y'all, Stu muttered, but I ain't never played no tuba.
Tuba? Peter paused and thought. Oh, of course. No, friend, this is no tuba. Here, just slip it on like so, and keep the mouthpiece close. Stu swayed unsteadily as Peter slipped the odd contraption over the shrew's shoulders and around his waist. He staggered as he tried to hold up the heavy object. It took a steadying hand from Monster to help Stu keep his balance. A strong possibility, Peter mused.
I disagree, Stu exclaimed. I'm carrying this thing around on my shoulders.
You wouldn't have to, Peter assured him. Monster will be supporting the bulk of the weight. Now it was Monster's turn to grimace at the prospect.
I will.
If we use it, Peter added. I'm still not convinced it will fit. I say, Matrix lad, how is the harness coming? Matrix held up several straps and a partially finished net. Looking back to Stu, Peter added, Try a few test phrases, please. Stu rolled his eyes and shrugged.
Hey, hey, hey!
His voice boomed out of the horn as if thundering from the depths of a vast cavern. A heavy silence fell over the room as the others glanced upwards, listening intently. Only the quiet of a light breeze met their ears from above. Well, that will certainly get their attention, Peter remarked. Still, it may be worthwhile to prepare a backup device if this one doesn't fit.
I second the notion,
Monster agreed.
Yeah, ditto,
Stu added. Peter grunted. Well, at any rate, we still need to acquire your suit, preferably from a tailor who can keep a secret. At once, a light bulb flashed on in the back of Peter's mind as he recalled a vital contact who worked extensively with clothes and costumes.
What?
Stu asked.
What are y'all thinking?
Matrix lad, Peter announced.
Uh-huh.
I shall need you to remain here. Finish the harness. Bess, Stu, Monster, and Ben, I'll need the rest of you to come with me. What, all of us? Ben asked. Peter nodded. Indeed. There is safety in numbers. More importantly, application with many eyes. I shall need you, at this Peter addressed Elizabeth, to keep watch from the end of the alley. Ben, stay with Bess and keep her safe. Stu and Monster, stay with me. As Peter and the others emerged onto the sidewalk, the moon was just beginning to dip towards the horizon. The streets were nearly empty, save for one or two great apes on either side. They were sparse enough to be no threat. However, this window of opportunity would not last for long. It was only a handful of hours before the sun rose, and then every rat and mouse in the city would have to scurry for hiding. As instructed, Elizabeth and Ben hung back near the corner of a building and watched as Peter, Stu, and Monster faded into little shadows. Peter made a beeline to a bag of rubbish where he and his companions took cover. Sticking his head out, Peter sniffed at the air and glanced cautiously about. Then he motioned for Stu and Monster to follow as he led them to a curious protrusion in the side of the building. It would have only been a quirk of design to a great ape, but for rats it was large enough to use comfortably as a lounge and burlesque. Peter drew a scrap of twisted metal from somewhere in his jacket and scraped its jagged edge along the mortar between the bricks. Unless I'm very much mistaken, it should be just about here. The edge of metal slipped into a very faint crack, just between a brick and the cement. Yet as Peter worked to loosen the brick, there came a sound of nails clicking against the pavement. Peter looked away from his work and motioned for Monster and Stu to hide. If things go poorly, don't try to save me. Just get that brick out. Despite Stu's silent protests, Monster nodded back, restraining the shrew with a large hand. A few quick strides carried Monster and his squirming charge back into cover, around the side of a large, full trash bag. With a heavy sigh, Peter tucked away his scrap of shrapnel, and turning around, he leaned back against the wall and waited to see the new arrival. Bill Dawson sauntered around the corner, cigar wobbling out the side of his mouth, his hook scraping along the brickwork. There you are, old chum, Bill gave a low chuckle. I've been looking all over the bladin' city for you. And so you found me, Peter answered curtly. What is it? Bill tapped the smoking tip of his cigar against Peter's chest, leaving a blackened circle burned into his jacket, and blew a puff of smoke into Peter's face. Eddie G's asking for you, boyo. Your first job just walked in through the front door. Indeed, Peter murmured. Tell him I'll be back shortly. Bill dug his hook through Peter's collar and dragged him close. You'll be there now, he snarled, and you can tell him your own bloody self. Bill jammed the cigar back in his mouth and gave Peter a harsh shove. Now get a move on. Stu and Monster watched Peter go. The rat threw a glance over his shoulder and winked back at them. Well, Stu whispered furiously to Monster. "Y'all just gonna let him go?"
"Yes," Monster answered. "He's in no danger just yet, and he told us to continue without him."
"And y'all always just do what you're told?"
"In this case, yes."
Monster emerged from his hiding place and took to scraping away at the edges of the loose brick with his halberd.
"Peter is a bright fellow, and I trust his judgment. This time."
Stu rolled his eyes and threw his hands up in surrender. Peter, meanwhile, was just then stepping through the entryway to Mr. Biggs. Inside, he found quite the crowd waiting for him, mostly familiar faces that had greeted him upon his first arrival, gathered around a smaller group that, for the most part, Peter did not recognize. He did, however, spot Murray among them.
"Oi, boss!"
Bill called out.
"I found him!"
The crowd parted as Eddie G. strode through and closed behind him. He held both Tommy guns high and proud, a cigar poking from the tip of his snout.
"Your plan worked, Dane. Not half an hour after Murray leaves, he comes crawling back to us with a bunch of his buddies, saying he wants to come home. But see, now I got me a problem."
At this, Eddie waved a gun in the general direction of the rats, prompting both his own men and the newcomers to duck for cover.
"How do I tell which of these dirty rats is telling the truth?"
"That is indeed a pickle," Peter agreed.
"And that's exactly where you come in, genius," Eddie added. "You had the brilliant plan, so you must have seen this coming."
Peter shrugged. "I actually hadn't thought that far ahead."
"Well, gee, man, that's too bad,"
Eddie retorted with a tone of mock sympathy.
"'Cause, see, you put me in this predicament, now you're gonna get me out."
Peter eyed the empty tip of a gun barrel as it nudged his shoulder, prodding him forward. "If you insist, sir."
"Oh, I insist, you dirty rat."
Peter raised an indignant eyebrow as his gaze flicked up to lock with Eddie's.
I shall have to meet with each of them, individually and in private."
"No," Eddie growled, jamming one of his guns under Peter's chin.
"You question them here, where I can keep an eye on all of yous."
Peter held his gaze firm, staring down the black pits of Eddie's eyes.
"My good sir, if each of these men is forced to answer my questions individually, where the others can neither see nor hear what they have to say, it will be easier to weed out the liars and establish the honest ones. The truth will align, and the lies will contradict one another."
"Or," Eddie retorted, "you guys can conspire without me knowing."
Leaning closer, he added,
"I know you've been planning something, Dane."
"Indeed," Peter confirmed. "I have been planning something, yes. I've been planning to restore the peace and end the fighting."
"And when the smoke clears, you're in charge, right?"
"Wrong. That's when I leave for good."
Eddie chuckled, unconvinced.
"Now why would a smart guy like you do that, after you've gone to so much trouble to set up a sweet little deal like this?"
Peter leaned forward, pressing the gun barrel deeper into his chest and forcing Eddie to take a step back.
"Because a smart guy, such as myself, has enemies, and I can't afford to stay anywhere for too long. I came here at an old friend's request, and I shall remain only until I have achieved my intent."
Eddie's nose twitched for a moment. Peter saw an edge of fear in his eyes. At last, Eddie looked away, fixing Bill with a commanding stare.
"You, Dawson, take the genius out back."
Looking to another rat, he added,
"You, Jimmy, bring out one of the traitors."
Bill obeyed, leading Peter out the front door and around the corner to a quiet patch of wall. They were joined a moment later by two more rats, a black, red-eyed rat, Jimmy, and a brown, black-eyed fellow. Peter regarded the prisoner for a moment. He was a scruffy, unkempt man, just a head shorter than the others, with a light cut scratched across his nose. He looked as if he'd been roughed up before Peter's arrival.
"Leave us,"
Peter commanded. Bill and Jimmy didn't move.
"I want no one influencing what this man tells me," Peter added. "Not Eddie G, and not either of you."
Bill didn't move an inch. He crossed his arms across his chest, hook gleaming in the faint light, and sneered at Peter. Jimmy, however, was more cooperative. He nudged Bill in the side and nodded toward the corner of the building. As he stepped away, Jimmy paused to wait for Bill. When the hook-handed rat didn't move, Jimmy grabbed a hold of his chain and gave Dawson a harsh tug. Despite an angry snarl, Bill finally disappeared after his compatriot around the side of the building.
"Now," Peter began, turning his attention to the remaining rat, "we have a great deal to discuss."
The other rat shrugged.
Sure, Mac, fire away."
"If you lie to me, I will know," Peter warned. "And if I know, so will Eddie G. Am I clear?"
The other rat grunted and cracked an unpleasant smirk.
"That's cute, Dane. Real cute. Acting tough all of a sudden. You notice anything?"
He motioned to their surroundings.
"No witnesses. I could rip your throat out and make my getaway, and no one would be around to stop me. The boys might even thank me, on both sides. Didn't think of that, did you, smart boy?"
A glint entered Peter's eye as he saw the rat smirk and raised it a grin.
"Then why haven't you?"
The other rat frowned. "Okay, fine. Doc Chuck knows you're here, Dane. He wants you, bad."
"Dead or alive?"
"Alive, and working for him instead of against him."
Peter nodded. "Understandable. Where can I find him?"
The other rat chuckled, shaking his head.
"What, so you can tell Eddie and the boys where Doc Chuck's holed up? Not happening."
Peter cocked his head to the side, eyes narrowing as his gaze bored into the other rat's inscrutable face. The rat knew exactly what Peter was after.
"Then how am I to work for him?"
"Trust me, Dane. When Doc Chuck has a job for you, you'll know about it."
The rat gave Peter an insolent pat on the shoulder.
"For now, you're right where he needs you."
Peter eyed the rat for a long time.
"Tell me, why did you join up with this Doc Chuck?"
A look of intense disgust crossed the rat's face, and he spat on the ground at Peter's feet.
"'Cause Eddie G's a loser who couldn't make it till Doc Chuck gave him a leg up."
Peter raised a curious eyebrow.
"Explain."
The rat sneered aside, fixing Peter with his left eye.
"Where do you think Eddie got that sweet street sweeper, eh? Only a genius like you could have built it for him. And that's Doc Chuck for you, a genius. He's got your brains and old Chubby Charlie's grit."
The rat grinned.
"And that's why I work for him and not Eddie."
Peter rubbed his chin for a time. Then he glanced up at the other rat and nodded.
"I believe you."
Glancing over his shoulder, he called out,
"Mr. Dawson!"
Bill from the bilge appeared from around the corner, not at all pleased to be summoned by the likes of Peter.
"This one's clean," Peter announced. "I'm ready for another."
The other rat stared back at Peter in shock as Bill roughly led him away. As he vanished around the corner, his shock changed to a look of intense pleasure. At the other end of Mr. Biggs, arms crossed in annoyance, Fay paced impatiently back and forth in her dressing room. For the moment, she was alone. For the moment, the other showgirls were performing, leaving the dressing room empty. But time was short. Fay's heart leapt at the sound of a sharp rap at her door. She rushed over, flung it open, and her heart immediately sank.
Hey, who are you guys? Where's Peter?
"Peter is occupied,"
A very large, vicious-looking mouse answered.
"He told us to come without him."
Fay took a step back as the huge mouse lurched through the doorway, a shrew riding on his shoulders.
Did he really?
She wasn't convinced.
Well then, what's his big plan, eh?
Monster struck his halberd against the floor, its blade gleaming as he held it aloft, and absently dusted himself off.
"I am to impersonate Chubby Charlie until the real Chubby Charlie has grown strong enough to put in an appearance."
No offense, pal, but ain't you kind of small?
Monster raised an eyebrow.
Yeah,
Fay went on.
a little on the short side, and skinny too. You're supposed to be the Chubby Charlie, not Skinny Sammy, you know.
Stu burst out laughing.
"Short! Hear that, meathead? Y'all do short!"
Monster growled irritably, wrenching the shrew from his shoulders with his free hand, and let Stu drop to the floor with a loud thud.
I will only be seen from a distance, and only in silhouette. As for my weight, Peter has a plan for that as well. I'm going to need a suit, like Chubby Charlie used to wear.
Uh-huh.
Faye grunted.
Yeah, I know the type. Well, let's see what I can find.
Faye flounced over to a wardrobe and threw its doors open. After rifling through several outfits, she pulled out a pinstriped suit jacket.
Try this on for size.
Monster set down his halberd and poked his arms through the sleeves. He winced as he buttoned his jacket closed.
It's a little tight around the waist.
Yeah,
Faye nodded.
it was made for a woman.
Stu cackled with glee.
Ha! Y'all never get me as the cross-dressing type. How you like it? Ow!
Monster swatted the shrew across the forehead.
Can you let it out?
A little, maybe.
Faye mused.
Try for a lot.
Stu piped up.
We both gotta fit inside.
Faye blinked.
Both?
Monster nodded.
Unfortunately, I was unable to mimic Chubby Charlie's voice to Peter's satisfaction.
But I was.
Stu added with a wink.
Right.
Faye grumbled.
And, how's anyone gonna hear ya?
Pete's working on something.
Stu answered. Faye scratched her forehead as she contemplated the task ahead.
Well, let's see what else we got.
Faye rifled through various drawers and chests, wardrobes and cabinets. Eventually, her eyes lit up as she laid eyes on something.
Here,
She spoke up.
check this out.
Faye brought out a full pinstriped suit, complete with a pair of rat-sized trousers.
I used to use this one in a comedy act before I came to Mr. Biggs.
Monster was skeptical as he tested the jacket for size. It was much wider around the waist, but also much tighter around the chest.
You do realize I'm supposed to be Chubby Charlie, not Pregnant Charlie.
Yeah,
Faye grumbled.
but this one I can work with.
And we might need the pants.
Stu added. Monster flinched as he felt Faye's fingers brushing his skin and tugging at the jacket.
What are you doing?
Relax, tough guy. Just looking to see what needs doing before you make a debut performance.
Stu glanced up at Faye.
Think y'all can deliver?
Yeah, sure.
Faye answered with a dismissive flick of her wrist.
It's gonna take me a while, and it won't be pretty, I tell ya.
Doesn't have to be.
Stu assured her. Faye's expression softened somewhat as she regarded the shrew.
You know, I think I like you.
Stu's eyes widened, and he grinned up at Monster.
Hear that? She likes me.
Faye's eyes flicked in Monster's direction.
You, on the other hand.
Such a shame.
Monster growled. By his tone and expression, however, it was clear he couldn't have cared less.
Is there anything you need, or may we go?
I see why you travel with Pete.
Faye remarked.
Someone's gotta be the brains of the outfit.
Stu burst out laughing, pointing at Monster and gibbering semi-intelligibly. Monster gave him another swat over the head.
I might need you to model.
Faye explained.
Both of ya.
For how long?
Monster asked. A loud knock at the door brought the whole matter to a screeching halt.
Longer than we got.
Faye exclaimed.
Quick, hide.
Stu frantically scanned the room.
Where?
Monster spotted the door of a wardrobe hanging open and, seizing Stu by the shoulders, rushed for the dark opening. He slammed the door shut behind them, and not a moment too soon. "Miss Beam!" a very familiar, weaselly voice called out. "Oh, Miss Beam! Faye!"
Is that?
Stu whispered. Monster nodded.
Michael Lorry.
Faye, meanwhile, threw the door open, a sour look on her face.
Yeah, what do you want?
Mickey stood outside, a glorious yet slightly wilted bouquet in his arms. "Flowers, Miss Beam, scavenged from the finest trash can in the alley." Faye grimaced as she accepted the gift.
Yeah, I can tell. Thanks.
"Bilge was sorry he couldn't deliver them himself," Mickey explained. "Eddie had him busy tonight."
Sure, now Biggie.
Faye turned away to drop the shriveling blossoms in a nearby wastebasket. Under her breath, she added,
Any days he's busy is a good day.
Mickey peered into the dressing room, raising a curious eyebrow while his lazy eye twisted and swiveled about, searching.
All alone, Miss Beam? I thought I heard you talking.
Yeah, I talk to myself, working out a routine.
Fay lied.
Oh, I see.
Mickey's eye locked onto a long gray object on the floor.
Then you didn't have any pretty little friends back there for me?
Mickey, there's never any friends back here for you.
There was a light scuffling sound from a wardrobe as Monster fought to stifle Stu's laughter. Mickey's odd eye immediately flicked in the direction of the sound. Fay set a hand on her hip, struggling to look stern and sound forceful.
Well, you delivered the flowers. Now get lost.
As Fay tried to shut the door, Mickey wedged his foot between it and the frame. Despite being only a fraction of her size, Mickey was a reasonably strong mouse, and he knew how to leverage his small stature to the greatest effect. Try as she might, Fay couldn't stop Mickey from forcing his way back in.
You seem frightened, Miss Beam. Perhaps you'll need a strong man to make you feel safe.
Yeah, sure. If you see one, tell him.
Mickey sauntered past her, intent on the halberd.
And what do we have here?
It's just a prop.
Fay lied.
Yeah, for the act I've been cooking up.
Mickey took the shaft in his hands and strained against the weapon's monstrous weight.
Oh, it's a very heavy prop, Miss Beam.
Yeah, always takes a man to move it.
Mickey scratched his head.
Yes,
Then his brow furrowed and his odd eye swiveled in Fay's direction.
Oh, Miss Beam, you shouldn't talk that way to me.
Why? 'Cause you're gonna be in the movies and be a little big shot and I'll never work in this town again?
No, Mickey grinned. There was a light click and a faint silvery flash in his hand.
Because I'm very sensitive. It's very easy to hurt my feelings. And I carry a very sharp, sensitive knife. You don't want to make me sad. No, not when I'm carrying my knife.
Fay hastily retrieved the flowers from the wastebasket.
Oh, yeah, I get it. But, you don't want to threaten me, right? Yeah, Billy's girl. It'd make him real mad if something happened to me.
Mickey giggled gleefully.
You say that like it's a bad thing.
Fay gulped.
Hey, if Bill finds you laid a finger on me, he'll thrash you within an inch of your life.
Mickey paused in a thought.
So, where's the downside?
There came a sound of scuffling from inside the wardrobe. Mickey glanced away, distracted by the faint sounds of voices. He couldn't make out what they were saying, only that it was a very heated argument.
No, you big dummy! Take your hand off that latch. If anyone finds out about us, Pete loses his edge. I'll not stand by in the face of evil. What's this about a face of evil? Peter's plan depends on the woman's life as well. I will let no harm come to her. Hey, wait. I hear something out there. I think it's coming closer. And I'll confront the enemy at last. No, wait. I got another idea. Yeah, look at this. What are you doing? Just try it on. Have you gone mad, shrew? Maybe, but y'all know the saying, there's method to my madness. He's never going to be convinced. Well, that's what these are for. Shrew, your method is madness. Y'all got a better idea? Yes. Wait a moment. Where's my halberd? Oh no. You big dummy! Y'all left it out in the open, didn't you? Perhaps I can disarm him. If y'all can get close enough, maybe. Now, just squeeze this on, like so. Blasted uncomfortable. Just hold still and pucker up, lover boy. I hate you. Hold still, meathead. If we ever get out of this, y'all can go back to being all macho. For now, bat those baby blues.
Mickey flung the doors of the wardrobe open and gaped at the figures within. His eyes widened as he looked them up and down. His tongue hung listlessly from his stunned jaws, and all thought of his confrontation with Fay vanished from his mind as he gazed upon the very picture of all he found beautiful and desirable in a woman standing right in front of him.
Oh, are you? "You can call me Geraldine, sweetheart," the shorter of the two announced.
"Moan," the hulking second began. The first cut her off with a stomp on her foot.
"She's my friend, Mona."
Mickey's brow furrowed in suspicion.
I haven't seen you perform before.
Yeah, well, they're...
Faye thought for a moment.
"We're new."
Stu jumped in.
"Miss Bean found us scrounging for scraps in our old club from before the bosses started dropping."
Mickey glanced to Faye, raising an eyebrow.
When did you start wandering so far away?
Faye crossed her arms indignantly.
When you started invading my dressing room.
Mickey looked back at the tall woman. Mona, her friend had called her, and looked her up and down. There was not a single hair on her body, save for the luxurious, curling blonde mane that spilled across her broad, powerful shoulders. Her arms were unusually long and thickly muscled. She looked as if she could have picked up even a rat and snapped him in two. Her teeth, though yellowed and chipped, were still jagged and savage. Mickey imagined them tearing into his throat. Then there were those cold, murderous eyes, the sort that might come lunging at Mickey just before his violent death. He grew lightheaded and felt a strange excitement rising in his chest, a sensation he hadn't felt in a very long time.
"Well,"
Stu added in a shrill falsetto,
"we all gotta be going. We got a number coming up next."
Stu began an exaggerated sashay towards the door. Monster nodded his agreement and seized up his halberd as he stalked after Stu. Mickey's eyes widened in disbelief at the show of strength, and his odd eye began spinning in sheer thrill.
Yes, you must. But
Mickey broke into a demented giggle.
do it with Faye. I want to be alone with Mona.
She can't, Stu shouted. Catching himself, he gave a cough and added in falsetto,
She can't. She don't know how the routine goes."
Yeah,
Faye chimed in.
they've been at this for years, like second nature, yeah.
Mickey scowled up at Faye.
Then learn it. You still have a few minutes.
Plastering an intoxicated grin across his twisted face, Mickey turned his adoring gaze back to Monster.
But the prop
Faye protested.
is too heavy for either of us to carry.
Mickey growled, his odd eye swiveling back to Faye with a look of intense irritation.
Then get a big, strong man to help you, woman.
Like you? Monster promptly dropped his halberd across Mickey's arms, sending the mad mouse crashing to the floor under its weight. Mickey blushed, a look of utter bliss crossing his face.
She called me a big, strong man. Oh!
Monster leaned over to Faye and softly muttered, "Will you be okay if we leave him here?" Faye glanced down at Mickey, who at that moment was heaving madly in a vain attempt to raise the halberd's shaft and regain his feet.
You sure that's a good idea? Leaving your big choppy thing here so everybody's gonna know you been through?
Monster looked back down at Mickey's struggling form and nodded his agreement.
It's never easy.
Mickey dangled from the halberd's shaft as Monster raised his weapon off the floor. The twisted mouse's eyes spun for a moment from the sudden motion, until they both finally settled on the blonde-wigged face before him.
Oh, where have you been all my life?
In a rocky gorge, killing and feeding on centipedes and tarantulas. Mickey grinned.
Kinky.
Monster gave Faye a helpless look. She just rolled her eyes and shrugged.
Hey, you're the one he likes.
Stu chuckled. Well, if y'all excuse us, we are on in a couple minutes. You're not going to leave me with him, Monster exclaimed. He fell silent for a moment as Faye and Stu gestured madly. Stu silently mouthed the word, "Feminine, feminine." Just then, Monster noticed Mickey raising a suspicious eyebrow as both his eyes gazed Monster's way. Clearing his throat, Monster spoke in the most feminine tone he could manage.
"You aren't really leaving me here with him?"
Faye gazed helplessly at Monster and nodded.
Beside her, Stu snickered furiously.
Handle it however you like,
she said.
Just try not to make a mess, okay?
The door closed behind them as Faye and Stu slipped into the hall outside, leaving Monster alone with the oblivious, love-struck mouse dangling from his halberd. Monster's mouth snapped shut, and he shot an angry glare Mickey's way.
Get down for that. That is, I mean...
Monster spluttered as he caught himself. Taking a deep breath, his heart fluttering with the indignity of it all, Monster repeated in a slightly higher pitch, "You can let go now." A moronic grin of bliss crossed Mickey's face as he obeyed, nimbly alighting on the floor as if he weighed no more than a feather.
Let us leave these accursed street rat politics behind, mi amore.
Mi amore?
Monster repeated, eye twitching.
It's Italian.
Mickey raised his eyebrows suggestively.
It means my love.
Monster's brow furrowed as a look of intense annoyance crossed his face.
I am not your love.
Not yet, pretty lady.
Mickey stepped forward, folding his switchblade closed and tucking it back into his vest.
First we run away and make a nice nest behind the ice machine across the street.
Monster blinked in disbelief.
You want to live under that thing? With all that noise?
Oh, yes, it would be wonderful. No one would ever look for us there.
I can't imagine why,
Monster muttered under his breath, fluttering his eyes in such a perfectly feminine manner that it sent his stomach twisting into knots of sheer disgust. Monster raised Mickey off the floor by the scruff of his neck and sweetly added, "I'm very sorry, but you're just not my type." Mickey playfully pinched Monster's cheek.
Maybe not, but you're mine.
Monster frowned. With a bizarrely perfect blend of falsetto and a savage snarl, he brought Mickey close to his face and roared,
I am not interested. Get it through your head.
He then tossed Mickey to the floor, sending the twisted mouse bouncing and skidding until he came up short against a dresser.
Oh, do that again, Mickey shouted with glee, but this time use some nasty words.
Monster blinked, more in confusion than feigned girlishness.
Again? Oh, yes. I love a strong woman who isn't afraid to throw her weight around.
Monster sighed, shaking his head in disbelief. He turned towards the door, eager to put the whole matter behind him. Mickey, however, wasn't ready to let it go at that, and he was much quicker than he looked. In the blink of an eye, he darted in front of Monster, grinning manically as he jammed his foot against the door, pinning it shut.
Don't make me hurt you,
Monster growled, his falsetto cracking as his annoyance got the better of him.
Oh, yes, hurt me, Mickey exclaimed, hopping about gleefully. I've been a very bad boy, plotting, scheming, and all kinds of nasty things. Oh, yes, I deserve to be punished. Punish me, punish me.
Monster fell silent for a moment. Mickey had proven to be a considerable thorn in his side, and Monster was not at all happy about being forced to dress in drag to avoid discovery. It occurred to him that after all this nonsense he greatly desired a punching bag. At long last, Monster's expression relaxed into a look of modest satisfaction. Yes, Mickey would do quite nicely.
As you wish, honey bun.
The term of endearment felt like poison on the tip of his tongue, but as Monster took note of Mickey's eager reaction, he concluded that it had been worth it. In the hall outside, Stu gaped in disbelief at the sounds of crashing, Mickey shouting gleefully, and Monster howling behind the closed door.
Your friend,
Faye muttered.
He don't, swing that way, do he?
Stu shrugged helplessly.
I didn't think so. Up till now, anyway.
Finally, it was over. Monster emerged, sliding the door closed behind him. He wore a dazed, yet oddly satisfied expression as he straightened his wig and adjusted his fake bust. Meeting the shocked gazes of Fay and Stu, Monster flashed a rare, toothy grin.
Hello.
Stu gulped.
Tell me y'all didn't just...
Monster chuckled, a deep, throaty chuckle.
It was a match made in heaven.
Oh, no! Stu shouted, rubbing his eyes.
He wanted me to hurt him, and I wanted to hurt him. We both won.
Stu fell silent. After a long time, he blurted out,
So y'all ain't going to wear this outfit a moment longer.
Monster cut him off, ripping the front of his dress open and stepping out of it like a big, scarred butterfly out of a sparkling cocoon and flinging his wig to the ground.
Hey!
Fay shouted.
That was one of my favorite dresses.
Monster glanced down at the torn garment.
Every battle has its casualties.
Stu smirked.
Well, don't y'all worry about this one. Unlike some people, I respect other folks' property.
Fay sighed as she looked down at the shrew, a weary gratitude in her eyes.
That one's a bit small for me, but I guess I appreciate the thought.
Stu stuck out his tongue at Monster as he slipped out of his disguise.
Now what?
Monster grumbled, throwing a cautious glance down the hall and then to the door.
Well, I can't work here.
Fay decided.
Not with Mickey hanging around. You two head back to the workshop, and I'll catch up when I get the chance.
Monster nodded sullenly and shoved out the loose brick. Once he and Stu were safely outside, they forced the brick back into place, leaving Fay to work out her next step. Upon emerging into the alley, Monster's first step was to set off for the other side and make his way back to Peter's former workshop. However, as he peered around the corner of Mr. Biggs, Monster spotted a pair of rats, Bill from the bilge, and a second that Monster didn't recognize, loitering against the wall. Monster quickly withdrew into the shadows, dragging Stu by the shoulder with him.
2 centuries,
Monster growled.
But why? Unless they suspect something.
Of course, Stu whispered back.
This is a war zone, you know, or have y'all forgotten that?
Monster fell silent.
Indeed. Then we'll stick to the cover of refuse until we reach the gutter at the far end. From there, we'll hide under the street curb.
That's using your head,
Stu chuckled.
Ain't so hard, is it?
Monster growled back in warning.
What there is of it, anyway,
Stu added with a defiant wink. Monster frowned, but had no further response. As quiet as a mouse, which should have come natural, of course, he and Stu stole away, leaving Mr. Biggs behind. Yet they were far from safe, for a pair of eyes kept watch over them from a perch high above. A lone rat peered down from the fire escape, leaning over the edge, while holding himself up with one hand. Strapped to the other was a curious little device, a metal cylinder with 2 triggers curling around his index and middle fingers. Raising his arm and taking aim, the rat fired a grappling hook, which caught on a second fire escape further down the building's wall. The rat gave it a sharp tug, testing its hold. Satisfied that the hook had lodged itself firmly in place, he then leaned back, stretching his other hand's fingers, and waited for Stu to step into just the right place.